everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive. And today we have a brand new writer here brought to you virtually. And I'm really excited to have them on. So I like to start every conversation by having my guests introduce themselves. So your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Hi, my name is David Tripler. I am from LA, born and raised. I'm a writer-director. I identify as he, him. And yeah, thanks for having me, Ruben. This is cool.
I like to ask people where they're from. So like, what's the short version? What's the long version? What do you tell people when they ask you where you're from?
I'm from LA. I'm an LA kid. I'm the LA kid, hopefully. We'll see.
So I also like to get a sense of a family history. So like, what's your parents, what's your grandparents' story? Like, can you like weave a tale for us, the Tripler saga?
Sure, yeah. My grandparents came in the 70s. My mom and dad were both born in Mexico. So people always like to ask because Tripler continuously throws people off when I say that I'm Mexican American. So yeah, they came in the States around 70s. Both my parents were born in Mexico, but came here as babies/toddlers. So they're very Americanized. My grandparents, both sides, landed in LatinX. For most people that don't know, LatinX is like a sub part of Inglewood. And it's fascinating to me because a lot of people don't even know that Inglewood is half Spanish-speaking people, which I'm sure we can get into when we talk about South Sunset, right? But they came here, they settled there. Funny story, my parents, I think, saw each other for the first time in church, and my grandmother noticed my dad. And then they end up at the same high school together. They start dating in high school. My dad was a senior. That's it. That's the history. They were high school sweethearts. And I think 4 years later, I was born. So here we all are.
And like, what brought them to like the LA area? Do you know?
You know, that's interesting. I don't know the exact answer, but it's funny because as you start to meet more people in LA, or you start to go to more functions, right? You really start to ask people like where they're from. And it seems like there's pockets of people in certain parts of LA that come from certain parts of Mexico. So my grandparents, my mom's side came from Michoacan. And it seems like anytime we went to a party in LatinX or like certain parts of Inglewood, you would hear that a lot. You know, the DJ shouts out, "Donde está la gente de Michoacán?" And everyone starts going crazy. Oh, they're really in here. So, but my dad's side is from Baja. My dad was born in Mexicali. They come from that side, have family all over Baja California. So it's interesting because I don't know if you've seen the show Them
Not yet.
Amazon Prime. It's really the one thing I really appreciate about that show. They use real history, talking about the migration, the Black community here in LA, but also brown families. Like the cities that we've come to know today as sort of predominantly Hispanic or Black were really white back in the day. And I think it's just they probably came at a time where there was a bunch of opportunity, and at that time, that's where people were finding more work and more stability and placement, right? So like, Inglewood, Gardena, Hawthorne, there was all these industrial towns, and all of a sudden you had a lot of Black and brown families move in, and boom, more people went to the beach, which is crazy to think that 45, 50 years ago, people weren't living by the beach.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that, you're from Inglewood and LatinX. I'm not from here, so I'm from Chicago. And I just found out like a year ago that there was like Latinx people in Inglewood. So like, how would you describe the neighborhood? Like for someone that's ever been there, like what's the vibe? What's it like there?
It feels like any other town that you pass by that has, people that look like us, people that are like our grandparents and our tios and tias. The markets, you know what I mean? I think we identify the places by those corner markets, right?
Mm-hmm.
The retail centers that have all those little tienditas that we come to know, right? That are just so familiar to us. Liquor stores, shopping marts, some amazing burger spots, the Spanish signage, obviously. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, here in LA, it's a big pocket of people all over Inglewood and the South Bay.
And so like, what did your parents do growing up? Like, can you describe your childhood to us?
My mom worked a lot. She did some community college, ultimately she decided to work more and save up money. When my dad was in college and sort of doing the whole struggles thing, my dad pursued accounting of all things. He didn't know, kind of interesting, he didn't know he could do that as a profession growing up as a kid until he was forced to help my grandparents communicate, I think, their tax situation one day to somebody in Inglewood or a family friend or something. And then all of a sudden the guy, I think, told him something similar to, "Hey, you may have an eye for this, so just consider it." He didn't even know that was a profession. But yeah, both of them sort of grew up, obviously in LatinX, Inglewood, in the hood from humble beginnings. And then in college, my dad, went to Loyola Marymount University, where I also ended up going. But he studied accounting and just kind of play the game of working for a big firm right away. Was really cool with his bosses and did a good job, and thus then find more work that way through a private company that was a client of that company, and that just sort of led him on the way to his path of now being a vice president of a small aerospace manufacturing, small little private place in El Segundo that makes drill bits for planes. And so he's always been, it's funny, he's the math brain, he's like the logical, this is how things need to be done. I need to see progress. I need to see results. And yeah, and then my mom had been working. She was working at the dentist office for a long time. One thing I appreciate about their story is they just always had each other's backs. My mom actually was the one that had the money to put down on a house early on when my dad was still figuring out his path. And just, it's one of the coolest things to me because she just had it in her mind she was going to save up and do something like that to have something for the family, until sort of my dad caught up and figured out what his career would be and what his work path would be. And that was it. They've just been working tirelessly to give me up until that point, the life that they never had. And I grew up with great privilege in that sense that they sent me to private school my whole life, So I think it's kind of an interesting mix, which also, later when we talk about writing informs sort of how I see the world. They were able to send me to, private elementaries in Hawthorne. And then I went to a private high school in Torrance. It was definitely a life they never had. And yet every day after school, no matter what, I always went to my grandma. I always went there back with my cousin and my uncle, so it was like I was getting that life of, hey, I'm the private school kid in my family, right? But I was always back in Lenox after school every day. So it's interesting when people ask me, oh, so you split time between Inglewood and Hawthorne growing up? And I said, yeah. I said, but I was always at my grandma's. So like technically, where was I raised? Summers, I was always at my grandma's. After school, I was at my grandma's because my parents worked. They picked you up after work. So yeah, that's sort of how they built a life for themselves and then for us. And now I have a sister who's 19 who's now in college, and they've just been grinding it out and giving us, when I was younger, obviously giving us that middle class life that they never had.
I'm always curious about people during their high school years. So like 14 to 18, I frame it in these three questions. Who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how do you think other people saw you?
Oh, that's funny. That's interesting. I could definitely describe myself as an athlete. I played a lot of sports in high school. I did cross country for like 2 weeks. I played baseball, I played basketball, I played football. I only got to the varsity level for basketball and football. I quit baseball for my freshman year, which till this day is one of the biggest regrets of my life. I love baseball, but the school I went to was huge on basketball. So I could say I was an athlete. I could say I was always in a relationship. I spent those 4 years in like 3 relationships. My junior and senior year, I was able to be a scholar athlete, which was something I was proud of at the time because it was having a 4.0 while playing varsity sports. So I wouldn't say I was a nerd, but I think inside of me, I did like school. And then I think the second one, who was I pretending to be? Probably the coolest person ever, At the school, like I said, basketball was a big thing there. And so, everyone knew, it's like one of those typical high school stories that you see where like, oh, basketball, here's the big thing. It was cool, it's cool to be a basketball player there. I don't think I was trying to be cool, but it's funny looking back. Obviously, that influences what's going to be hopefully my first feature film. But we were big basketball lovers, sneakerheads, back before it was such a big thing. So like we were into shoes, we were into finding shoes and sneaker hunting and that whole thing. And like, it's so funny looking back how I dressed. Cause I can remember going to buy the academic tracksuits and Sean John tracksuits and like that whole velour suit phase, so I can see you laughing about it, but it was, so it's like, was I trying to be cool or at the time, was it just the style, So the pro club days.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And so like, what'd you do after high school? Like, did you have a plan? Did things go according to plan?
No, it's interesting. Basketball meant so much to me that I was thinking about walking on in college. I sort of gave up on it. I wasn't, to be fair, obviously we make up in our heads what the memory is, right? But I think when I look back, I just wasn't fully committed to it. It's something that actually stays in the back of my mind to this day with my creative career. It's like, you can't be half-assed, right? You can't be half-assed about anything. I wasn't fully committed to it. And then at the time, a coach from the NBA came to coach the college team. And someone was like, you'll never play as a walk-on. So like, it may not be worth your time, And I just kind of let that drive, I think, the fact that I wasn't truly committed. And that was just like a dagger, like, okay, something else. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I studied business simply because I sort of followed my dad's footsteps. And I said, well, he studied business. Business seems to be like a baseline for anything you need. And then, of all things, a counselor, I don't even know why she recommended this, but in high school, I guess to segue from that last question, right? I had always actually wanted to try acting, but I never had a chance playing sports, right? And then I used to mess around with my dad's JVC camera all the time. I didn't even realize this until I got to college, actually, how important that would be. But I used to mess around with his camera, in-camera editing stuff, recreate Nike videos. We would recreate. I think there's a tape somewhere, and I have to find it. We recreated the scene in Next Friday with Jacob Vargas, I think is the actor, when he was, cleaning his dickies in the garage and the dog, was running Chico or whatever. He's like, "You're gonna ruin my dickies," like we recreated our whole scene with the family. And I would just remember recording stuff with my friends, So when I got to college and I needed something else, it was strange to me. But my counselor was like, "Yo, you need an acting or you need an elective that maybe can be creative. What about an acting elective?" And I ended up taking a theater elective. And I think that's actually what I talked to you about one time, right? When I heard you in the clubhouse. And I totally forgot that theater is actually how this all started for me creatively. I did some classes. The teachers were kind enough to say, "Hey, you're green," which everyone hears right away, right? "Hey, you're green, but like keep going. There's something that you can keep pulling out from your performances and whatnot." And so I kept at it. I jumped in some playwriting classes, all introductory stuff, so nothing was advanced. And at some point, I was even considering a minor in theater. But it's weird because I came from a sports brain. I think it was something competitive for me, where I walked in and I said, "Oh, this is competitive for me. I need to see it as a competition." I wasn't like, not toxically, like I wasn't toxic about it. It wasn't like, "Oh, these are my competitors." It was just like, I need to convince my brain that this is something I'm competing for, and how I memorize and do all this stuff. And it just worked at the time. But it's funny, the only time I've ever been so nervous to do anything in my life was that first time I ever did a theater showcase. And it was like tiny little theater, 50 people. But it was like one of those college like packed rooms, and like the stage is right next to people.
Yeah.
I almost threw up. Like, I kid you not, I almost threw up. And I had been in huge basketball games in high school, packed houses, never nervous. And like the nerves came over me and just hit me like a ton of, "Oh my God, this is crazy." Like I'm gonna throw up. But I kept going. I don't know. I just kept doing it. And then that's how it led me into working in the student film. And that was it. I was just like, "Oh, this is interesting. This is different. I've never done something like this, to be in front of the camera." And then got, I think, another short or two. And then a senior came to me and said, "Hey, I'm doing my senior thesis." I said, "Well, can I audition?" He goes, "You're too young," because he needed some cops, right? And I'm like 19. So he's like, "Hey, but if you're interested, do you want to help me in casting? Do you want to help me PA and maybe grip on set?" Something just told me to say yes. And I said, "Sure, why not? Let me just say yes." Oh, and then they shot on location in Torrance, not too far away from where I went to high school. And seeing it on location, I think was like, that was it. My sophomore year, I saw it and I was like, this is how they make movies. I was like, this is dope. Like, how do I learn how to do this? I actually had a dean at the film school discouraging me from applying. He was like, "You're too far in. You're already like about to finish your sophomore year from your business major. You'd be backtracked another year possibly, and you take 5 years to graduate." Everything. He tried to discourage me. And yeah, I applied, and I think it was entering the fall of my junior year of all times that I finally committed and said, "I'm going to apply to the film school." My parents were shocked. At the time, they're so super supportive. They've always been, but like at the time, no one in my family pursued creativity, creative arts, anything. So I'm sure when it comes to being the first, to do something like that, it's just a shock. My dad was like, "Whatever happened?" Oh, that's another thing I guess I missed. My dad was like, "What happened to wanting to be a sports agent?" I had told myself that if I wanted to stay close to sports, I should major in business law so I can try to go to law school and become a sports agent, because I love the information of behind the scenes and how things came together. And at the time, there was a sports business journal I used to read a lot when I was 19, because it talked about media rights, TV rights, sports rights, contract stuff. And I was so into it. I really was. And I told my dad, I said, for the first time in my life, at that moment, I was so sure of what I wanted to do the first time. Like, I was so certain. There was no doubt at all that I didn't want to do that. I was for sure 100% going to go in and really lock in to do it. And yeah, I applied, and unfortunately I got in. I got into the film school, and yeah, it was expedited. That's like a whole film degree that I had to force into like a 2-year window, or 2.5-year window, because I did take 5 years to graduate. And yeah, and then I, just staying on that path, making short films, it was like, that was it.
Yeah. And, I am curious, like, what were the films you were making? Like, you're a film major now. Like, what was coming out creatively?
That's funny. I was just thinking about posting all my college stuff. I was a huge Martin Scorsese fan. Like at that time, it's interesting to think about actually, which I think we can get into later. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about like diversity for diversity's sake and like wokeness and all that stuff, right? At that time, I was like, well, what are my favorite movies? You know, and I would go back to like, oh, Goodfellas, Casino, and Scarface. So I wanted to make movies that I guess kind of felt street, right? But at that time, I like had no education or anything or any thought about what I would create or how I would create, and so everything was so fast. I didn't have time to think about it. So it was just a matter of like, well, let's just try things. You know, I made like a short little funny. I don't. It wasn't funny, but it was like funny the way we made it. Horror thriller kind of vibe thing with like a stalker with a camera, like you know, trying to get into a house, and like there was cool stuff with shadows and stuff that I was trying out. You know, but it was just fun because I think not having the filter, the expectation of anything, lets you have fun. In college is the best safety net, right? You can go ahead and make those mistakes and just try things. So I don't think there was anything in particular I was trying to make. I was just trying to learn how to make something, you know? I remember the first time we had to expose film, I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to be a cinematographer. You know, 75% of it did not get exposed right. And like, we couldn't even watch it in class. So I was like, yeah, it's not for me. I got to hire people. So my next project was stuff like try to be street and like gangster thug kind of, you know, vibe and a kidnapping, you know. I was just like, oh, let me just like do cool shots and see it that way. I wasn't thinking of like how deep I was writing things or how deeply I wanted to get into themes. And then I didn't do a senior thesis. I ended up working for a director who co-directed a film with Gina Rodriguez. It was like one of her first films called Philly Brown. I remember it being like a talk of Sundance because Gina, you know, was being talked about a lot at the festival. And I looked at the directors and they really wanted to push for Hispanic representation. And I think that's instead of trying to make that content, I think I was more so concerned about the messaging, you know, because at that time too was when the Fast and the Furious franchise came out and they were paying so much attention to Latinos and like, oh, they're making X amount percentage in like the Fast and the Furious franchise. And I'm like, yeah, because we want to be entertained, you know, like you guys you're not even looking at the numbers right. And so I think at that point I did get interested in saying, well, I do want to act still. I still want to act and pursue that, but nothing's going to change unless I start to write and maybe do things that can give more opportunities to other people in front of the camera, you know? And I think more towards senior year, I really started to think about those concepts and think about what I would do.
And so, like, what did you do after college? Like, did you have a plan? Did you know what the hell you were doing?
You know, it's funny to think about now because, you know, to be like very open and honest about this, there was a couple of times that I wanted to quit. You know, I graduated college and, you know, I thought my shorts, it's funny and I laugh because it's embarrassing, but at the time, you know, you make decent student films and you're like, oh, well, that's it. Like, of course, you know, something's going to happen for me, but there was no plan. I didn't understand anything about film festivals. I didn't understand about how to put it out in film festivals. I knew nothing. And at the time I kept working at a restaurant that I was working at through college. So I just kept waiting tables. And then that led me to bartending at those restaurants and another restaurant. And it's crazy because I was like, what was I doing for 4 years? Like for 4 years until I really took writing seriously in 2016. I was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing for these 4 years? Nothing is happening. I would just sit there and think about the things I wanted to do. There was a stretch, I will say, in those 4 years that I actually got back into basketball of all things and started working out I was going to this gym and I was around a lot of basketball players and I would play with them. And one of them really inspired me to get serious about it. And so for one summer, I really, really, really did get serious. And I said, man, what a dream it would be to play in like some C league in Italy, to play pro basketball. You know, even if it nothing, like, oh, that's cool. I play pro basketball in like a C league in Italy. Cool. But I was a little too late for that whole process. And the summer was over. I was in fantastic shape. But I had a serious moment with myself in the talk. And I said, yo, so what are you doing? You know, are you going to get serious? Like people love, that's the interesting thing. You know, when I read books like Save the Cat, right? The quintessential entry level, like book about writing. I always found it interesting that he said, pitch your ideas to random people, you know, to see if they work. For those 4 years, I probably pitched so many of my ideas to people like, oh, what about this? And like, what about that? And people loved the ideas. And they would come back to me like, yo, man, so like, are you working on that? And I'm like, oh, no, it's just an idea. No. But something happened in 2016 where something clicked. You know, I was on my job at Fox where I was technical directing. I was really young at the time and I got promoted fast. And there was a lot of, you could just feel, not resentment, but you could kind of feel a little bit of the hate from people that had been there for so long, wondering why I was getting promoted. So, that tension. This is probably a cool story that I hope gets made one day, just because of how it started. My dad literally saw that something was wrong. He pulled out some old stuff that I did, story wise, creative wise, because I would draw a lot as a kid. I would read poetry books as a kid. So he's like, "Yo, you were really creative as a kid." So like something about what I was going through told him pull out this stuff for him to remind him. He pulled out a story. It's the cheesiest thing, but I wrote a story in second grade that won like a story thing. It was a very simple 1-page story about a kid in a bicycle factory. I literally took that page. I went to the computer and I said, "I'll be right back." I literally I don't know what came to me. It was like one of those weird, I'm not going to maybe it was spiritual, I don't know, but it was a weird thing that I took to the computer, sat down there, and maybe for about 15 minutes just typed. And I created this outline for a whole movie idea. I literally just thought I was like writing stream of conscious, which it probably was, but I was like, what the fuck did I just write? So I printed it, I handed it to him, and I said, "Yo, what do you think about this? Like, is there a story there?" And he literally looked at me after reading it, was like, "You literally just took this page, went over there, and typed this 5-page outline?" And I said, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, this is a great story." Like, I basically took what I was going through at that time at my job and infused the DNA of what I was going through into this story through the eyes of a 10-year-old boy. And it's just like the story worked. And I thought, oh, he's my dad. He's just hyping me up, But that was the year that I jumped back into UCLA Extension. And it was the first time I took actual screenwriting courses to say, let me see if I should really pursue this. And in the course, I pitched 3 ideas. One was one of the original ideas for Hype Beast, which is a movie I hope to make this year. Another one was a coming-of-age high school football story. And then the third story was the one I typed up. And the cool thing was the class voted on what story you had to go outline. You couldn't just outline the one. Everyone in the class unanimously, along with the teacher, picked the one that I wrote that day when my dad gave me that. So I was like, interesting. I guess I'm going to toot my own horn here, but I was frustrated in that class because the teacher never gave me feedback. Every assignment, everything that he gave us, he would never give me feedback. And that one day I just went up to him and I said, "Yo, man, I signed up for this course. I paid $400 some to sign up in this class. Like, can I get feedback?" He looked at me and he was like, "Your story is ready to be written." He's like, "It's a very rich story. The depth is there. The story is there. The characters are there." He's like, "Go write it." I don't know why, for whatever reason, after that class was over, I did not write this. I said, "I can't write this period piece because I will never get a chance to make it right." I said, "One day I'll come back to it." And it's funny because I'm at that place right now where I think I'm going to actually get back to writing it this year at some point because I think I'm ready to write it. But I look at the outline, I look at the story notes, the movie's like outlined. It's like one of the most fully outlined things that I have. And it's just so crazy to me that that's how the story came to me at that time. Like through a moment of sort of this transitional depression that I was going through because of my job and not knowing where I was headed. Literally, I was going through a rough moment in that stretch of my life because I just did not know. I didn't know what I was trying to do. I didn't know if I had just wasted 5 years of college. I didn't, the whole failure talk. And I legitimately thought about quitting. And so, but that class and that story showed me with that teacher and those students that I could write. I was like, oh, maybe there's something here. Maybe I shouldn't give up. Maybe I should keep going. And yeah, and that led me 2 years later, right? 2018, where I was thinking for another 2 years what I wanted to do and make. And I said, well, I also want to be a director. So I need to go direct something. And sitting there watching Atlanta trailers at my job, which I still had, in cable operations at Fox because FX was part of the network. I started seeing Atlanta trailers, and that's what sparked the idea for South of Sunset. I was like, why don't we have shows like why don't we have shows that can be different instead of preachy, on the nose, harping the same old things, which, you talked about doing that Clubhouse, right? It's like, we're tired of it. We're done with it. So that sort of spawned like me wanting to do sketches. And my cousin was like, well, you've been talking about doing sketches for 2 years. Like, let's just do one. And it turned into a 15-page script. And I was like, oh, I have a pilot. I was like a digital pilot. Yeah, that's literally like how I got to those moments and places in my life.
Let's talk about South of Sunset, because that's sort of how you got on my radar. I'm always trolling the internet for like content and to see who's out there, who's making cool shit and like who I should talk to. And, saw South of Sunset, watched the first 2 episodes, and I was like, oh, who is this? Like, the first 2 episodes are very good because you can see exactly like what we're all talking about, what we're all complaining about, but what we're also like desperately hungry for in terms of like content. And I saw that, I was like, oh, this is someone that sort of knows what the hell they're talking about and is actually like executing it. So I'm curious for like South of Sunset, like how did this, like, all this frustration and writing it come to, like, then, like, okay, now I'm gonna make this? Because that's a big step, you know. It's a big step to be like, I guess I'm making this thing, and I'm like, how did all that work? How did it come into like reality?
I was sitting there watching trailers of my job, and it was one of the coolest parts about my job is that sometimes I could just watch FX shows. Sort of these Atlanta trailers come on, and I'm like, yo, what is this? It was just so different and cool, and I just sat there and I said, yo, why isn't there a show for us like this? I can just be something similar. It has nothing to do with some preachy message. You know, I don't want to get into this because we could talk about this forever, but I think there's a genuine tone deaf gap with the kind of content we're allowed to bring to the table versus what people actually want to watch. And part of that too is like people wanting to keep their jobs, so they're just continuously selling that kind of thing, right? And so I was thinking about all that at that time, and I said, well, I need to make something. And at that time, I had no expectations for anything because I hadn't made a short film. The short films I made in college were silent films because they emphasized the visual storytelling aspect. No words, like tell us your story in images. And I was like, okay, that's cool. So I sat there and I wrote the script and I kept tweaking it. And like, you know, shout out to people that truly are great friends and blessed to have had. But like my friend Blake Pickens, my friend Samantha, like I shared the script with them and they gave me a lot of notes. It was very like entourage-y at first, like more so than it is now, you know, like they're like, yo, or you got to tone down some of the jokes and the things you're saying. I was like, oh, okay. Because I didn't have the filter of like, I got to be sensitive to this, sensitive to that. I was like, I'm just writing. And so even from that process, it took months, you know, months for me to really get that 15-page script into like the best shape that I thought possible. I think it was like draft 7. At that point, I said, I'm not changing anything anymore. Like, I just want to go make it. Let's just see. I was terrified. I'm going to be very honest. I was terrified because I hadn't made a short with dialogue. I was terrified that all the sound was going to come back bad. I said, you know what? I said, I also am a fan of giving people new opportunities. So like my cousin, so you saw the episode. So like Rolo is my real cousin in real life. And like, he to me is one of the most like funny, outrageously like unique people I know that's also raw and real and does not give two shits about happiness, you know? And I'm like, I want to see someone with his energy on screen. Why have I not seen? And I said, well, you have to give people these opportunities, right? You can't just say, well, I need to find an actor for this or for that. There were certain roles like Gabby, who was Jennifer, the girl. She's an actress. She has been acting and you know, had the acting experience along with me. But everyone else, I gave a shot. I gave a first-time shot. You know, my dad was the boss in the office. I said, Dad.
Saw that.
He was like, well, you want to use the office space? And I said, yeah. He's like, well, can I have a role? And I'm like, oh, here we go. I'm like,
that's Hollywood, baby.
I was like, I'm trying to get my career started. So you're trying to squeeze and weasel your way in here, huh? I love my dad, man. He's funny. And yeah, so I said, you know, here we go. Let's just go do it. And my cinematographer, Will Carnahan, is amazing. The editor, Will and Ellen, editor and cinematographer, I went to college with, never had worked with them before. And it was funny even how our lives kind of crossed paths again. It just said, hey, here's a short. Would you like to be a part of this and help me out? I don't have money to pay you, but I want all the money to go into production. Actually, that's not true. I think I did pay them. Maybe not. They're going to send me a text after they hear this and be like, you didn't pay me shit. But they read it and were like, yo, this is funny. Yeah, I would love to help out. And so I just wrangled my friends, Ace, Dre, John, my cousin, and said, yo, you guys are funny. I want to put you on camera. That's it. And we would get together and like do some reads and kind of change some things and tweak some things. And then we just made it. You know, it was the craziest thing because I spent $4,000 in my own savings at that time. And I was terrified if I was wasting money. And obviously someone's going to go, well, you have to invest in yourself, right? But at the time, I mean, $4,000. And to think like, I don't know how I'm ever going to make that money back, or I don't even know if this is going to go well. And we shot that whole episode in a day and a half, which was like, wild. Like skeleton crew, go to my parents' house, shoot this, go to the park 2 blocks over. The next day, going to an office space, and then we're going to K-Town for my friend's apartment. Like, but man, it's just so much fun when you do it, right? It's like so much fun when you just get that done. And I had no expectation. I was stuck. And like the blessing in disguise was Amazon. That whole Amazon contest was the blessing in disguise. And I'm so thankful for it because I didn't know what to do with that short film for months. And Amazon announces they're going to have a diversity contest for short films. And I was like, oh my God, here it is. Here's the opportunity. And I had no clue. Oh, it's funny. Right before that happened, and I want everyone that's listening to this that is figuring out how to get their work seen, Amazon has a platform where you can self-distribute. It's called Prime Video Direct, I believe. You literally can go make your short film, You can make a whole digital series or a show for that matter, or a movie, and just submit it on Amazon Prime Video yourself. And Amazon lets you use their marketing. They let you use their logos, you know? And it's such an invaluable tool that I don't know that the HBOs do that. I don't know that these other platforms do that. I'm sure iTunes, I think you can probably still do that through Apple. So anyway, I was thinking about uploading it, and then the contest announcement came through, and I said, what perfect timing. And that was it. And the coolest thing was, okay, we're really going to see the reactions of people, because the only way you got into the top 10 was through data, minutes watched, reviews, comments, all that. So I was like, okay, here we go. And once we did that, I mean, it was like wildfire. I was like so fortunate that so many people just kept sharing it. They would repost it, watch this. Oh my God, this is funny. People would leave comments. And I think we did such a good job as a team. My editor did an amazing job with all the content she created for us, because it was like nicely formatted, nicely done. And we were very clear on the instructions for people to say, you have to leave a comment, leave a star review or rating, and share this, please. Like, the more people that watch, the better. And we cracked the top 10, you know, and then we ultimately placed in the top 5, and we're one of the winners. I was like, yo, I recouped my money, you know. I was like, oh my God, I recouped my money. I was like, damn, I was like, I'm a paid filmmaker. And then, yeah, I used the rest of that money to recoup, and then used the rest of that to make episode 2. And then we just won the official Latino Best Webisode for that one. So no, I appreciate people watching it. I don't know, it's unfortunate, because I feel like the show should get made. There has to be someone out there that wants to take a risk to do it, but it's so hard. I mean, I don't know. When you get to the table, it seems like people want your show to be about something. It can't be about nothing. And I'm like, but there's a lot of shows that about nothing, and just like simple dating about people in general. So why can't we have a show like that?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I hope I get to make it. It may be a master of none for me, right? Or like, knock on wood, at some point I get to make it 3 years, 4 years from now. But I still think the moment's now.
Well, tell people what it is about, and tell them where they can find it too, because I have a bad habit of talking so much about something, and then we never actually say what it's about.
So South of Sunset was basically a dramedy episode about someone who is going through his fake Mexican-ness. So South of Sunset episode 1, Fake Mexicans, is on Amazon Prime Video still. You can go watch it. The second episode we never uploaded, but our actress Gabby has it on her YouTube channel. Episode 2 is the Salsa Chronicles. And yeah, it was basically just about everyday life of life, master of none, curb your enthusiasm kind of vibes about everyday living that just happens to have us as the leads. And that's pretty much it. There was no other big hook, you know, other than watch us laugh at ourselves, watch us be quirky and fun and like dumb, because we do this. Like, this is how we talk about dating, all of us. It doesn't matter if you're straight, gay, whatever. Like, we all do this, you know?
Yeah, no, and it's very funny. You act in it. I think it's very topical. I think you're right, is for now. And I don't know. I think I just highly recommend everyone watch the first episode, because I think it's a very good showcase of who you are, and like sort of like as a person, but also as an artist, you know?
Thank you.
And people are starved for the content. I was like, I've never seen something like this, and it's funny as hell. So like, you got off that Amazon thing. So like, I'm always curious about stuff like this, because it's like you get into a contest, fellowship, whatever. And what were the expectations of like what's next? And then like, what was the reality, you know?
I'm glad you asked, because I think if anyone out there is struggling with this, like, it's okay. Just keep writing. So I'll be very honest and say that there was a time, and my fiance now, it's interesting. My fiance now met me right. I was just finishing editing that episode. So she's seen sort of the roller coaster, but I was down on myself for a little bit, you know, because what I should have done was had a TV pilot ready to go, like a full TV pilot, and then a short after, right? So then I can go around and, oh, here I have a TV pilot. I wasn't thinking about a TV pilot. This was like a wonderful experiment to see if it would work, you know? And after that, there were people that came into my life, friends, potential managers that were like, yo, we want to help you find money or do this or do that. I wasn't ready. Simply put, like, I was not ready for that moment. And it was one of the hardest things to swallow, because it hurts. Like, everyone's asking you, friends, family, yo, what's up? Why are you going to make more episodes? And I'm like, are you going to pay for them? No. And it was really hard, but I was really down on myself about it. Like, legit, for a few months, I was like hurting about it, because I was like, man, I feel like I'm letting a lot of people down. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm letting a lot of people down. I don't have the money to make 8 episodes, 10 episodes. At the time, you know, I couldn't. Maybe we should have crowdfunded back then. Some people still say, why don't you just crowdfund it now and just go make your show independently, 8 episodes. And I'm like, huh, it's something that we talk about, but I don't know, it was tough. So, but the one thing that it did do was, yes, it helps you meet people. I think the coolest thing, and like obviously you've interviewed some of my new friends, right? But so a lot of the people that I met on the festival circuit, I think that's what cheered me up about it, is that I genuinely liked that I got into Nylif, because I met other creators, and it's funny when you go through that whole shorts process. I think everybody understands how hard it is. So when you meet other creators, it's just like a camaraderie that you instantly feel. On top of the fact that there was so much good work. I mean, I can't tell you how many shorts I saw where I was like, yo, this is inspiring. There's a lot of talented people, a lot of emerging talented people trying to do the same thing. And, I met the Franciscos and the Eddies, the Dominics. Like, I met them all through that. And I genuinely am rooting for these people. I haven't connected with a lot of them because of COVID and whatnot, but like being around them, I'm like, yo, we all have that energy. We legitimately all have that energy where we want to see the change collectively. And I'm truly rooting for all these people. I really am. So when I see Eddie has, a gig on his TV show, like, I'm like, yo, props. Like, I can't wait what's next, And I think that's what carried me. But to answer your question, there was a lull. Like, it was hard. It was hard. And I had to get back to say, as much as people are wanting me to do this right now, what do I want to do? And it brought me back to my feature script for Hypebeast. I was like, that movie idea came to me in 2012. It's been with me ever since. It's gone through so many renditions and changes on what the movie was even about. And I decided to tell it, thankfully, to my uncle and my cousin. They told me from the beginning. They said, why don't you just tell the movie how we grew up? Like, why don't you tell it like semi-autobiographically, like infuse us into the scene of basketball and sneaker culture the way we came to it? And I'm like, yeah, you know what? You're right. It's unfortunate, but you don't see our perspective in the culture, and we partake in basketball culture, in sneaker culture, and yet it's never been told. And so that's just sort of how I've gotten to where I've gotten now, and confidently super happy that I did that, because that feature script has gotten me a lot of meetings, and a lot of people like it. They love the voice. They really respond to it. But one, they don't know how to make it. And two, I'd be a first-time feature filmmaker. So how do you give money, or how do you okay that with someone that hasn't done it? So it's almost like I'm back to square one, in the sense of taking the spirit of what I did with South of Sunset and now saying, well, look, I did shoot a sizzle scene for my feature script to show people the capability of what I can do dramatically, right? And say, hey, I can also. And I think so far people have responded really well to it and said, yo, that's good. I want to read the script, And so, I don't know. Oh man, it's a long game. You've talked about writing and whatnot. It's like, it's going to be never ending, where we're going to go through these moments where we're just down, man. We're writers. We're down on how we feel about our creativity and what we're writing and working on. But ultimately, you just got to keep going. And even now, I'm thinking about what's next. Do I want to make another short film that's dramatic? Do I want to write a bunch of my short stories? Do I want to crowdfund for South of Sunset? But everything tells me on how this industry works that I have to go make a first move. I have to, because that's going to lead you to more work as a director, and more people believing that you can execute at that level.
Let's talk about Hypebeast. So like, what's it about? Where did the like sort of inspiration come from? And like, what's the path forward for it?
Hypebeast is a semi-autobiographical coming-of-age crime drama that basically centers around this guy, Dre, who is a longtime sneaker collector and basketball lover. And the movie goes through 3 parts of his life: 1997, 2004, and present day. In present day, that collection he's amassed throughout his life is now worth hundreds of thousands. His cousin, who is now an adult, a young adult, finds out about this collection and is going to try and set him up and rob him. It's told triptychically, sort of in that Moonlight structure, where it's 3 parts. But the movie is very coming-of-age crime drama. I think of movies like Seeing the Kids in Boys in the Hood or City of God, like seeing kids in those environments, right? Mm-hmm. But it turns into a high school sort of hustling sneakers and love story in high school in the part 2. And then in part 3, it turns into a cat and mouse, sort of who's playing who kind of game. I don't want to give anything away, but I feel like I get the town, the town vibes, where I'm like, yo, I would want to see a very elevated like that present day. So to me, it's going to be such a fun movie to make. And yeah, it came to me because growing up as kids, that's how we came to basketball culture. We used to go to swap meets with my grandma, and that to me is what signifies my Latino, experience in the U.S. without saying it. I think I'm never going to be worried about my background or my name defining me. When people want to question it, because hopefully the messaging and how I portray our people will come off as authentic. People have responded to the script and said some things in the script are so specific that you lived that experience, right? And I'm like, well, yeah, because I'm pulling from my grandmother being the woman on the block where all the kids wanted to be. All the kids came to my grandma's house to eat. All the kids came to my grandma's house to play. And that sort of inspired the story. And I said, this is crazy. Like, if I ask you, I'm curious because I know I'm talking so much about all this stuff, right? Like, if I asked you and I said, Ruben, what's one of your favorite coming of age films that has U.S. Hispanic storyline? What would you say? And when I ask you, I'm like, what's your favorite movie? A lot of people don't even say movies about us.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's not necessarily that their fault for saying that, but like, there's not a lot of those stories. When I do my research, there's the research that I have done that I'm excited about. Like, I love The Real Women Have Curves. I thought that was a great story that showcased that. I'm trying to think of the other ones that I've had. There's a movie called Raising Victor Vargas that, I don't know when, get mad at me. I need to watch it. I have not seen it. But there's a movie, Mi Familia, that kind of did 3 generations back in the day in the 90s, which was the director of Selena, right? Right before Selena, he had Mi Familia. And then before that, he had El Norte. Mosquita and Mari is another one, that chronicles a U.S. experience. But outside of that, how many movies are there, And so I said, I want to tell a movie where we can sort of live in that space and come of age to see kids that look like me, that grew up like us, that were functioning. And then 2, that sizzle scene that I shared with you, what does the duality of our existence look like? People use code switching a lot, right? But like, what does that actually look like? And to me, it looks like me walking into my grandmother's house, looking at the stove, speaking Spanish, asking how she's been, running to the TV in the back room, putting on Dr. Dre and watching Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Like, there's a switch when you're walking down that hallway, So it's like, well, how does that look like on film? How does that look like in a story? And to me, I think that's where I kind of try to aim my storytelling. It's like, well, how do you actually show code switching? What does it actually look like? What is my second generation perspective? All that's to say that all these ideas and all that came to me for this movie to show us in those spaces. How did we look like in the 90s? What was high school about for us? Well, in 2004 is about Nikes, Jordan packs, dunks, girls, and our homies, And then present day, what does that look like? And someone asked me recently that, hopefully I'll be working with, but they said, oh, why did you change? Why did the tone kind of change in this way commercially in part 3? And I said, it's not that the tone changed. How do you actually make a story about real sneaker culture that captivates people and gets people engaged and still keep the family dynamics, right? And then I'm telling it in a 3-part structure because for me, sort of the problem that we have in our community is sort of this carrying over through the time periods of trauma and pain. And at some point, some of us are going to have to break that curse. I don't want to call it a curse, right? Like, some of us are going to have to break that chain of pain to step up for one another. And I feel like that's one of the biggest messages in the movie, where this character has gone through so much and still decides to be there for somebody that he knows is going through the same thing he went through in order to break away from that. So that's another thing to my writing is, what does breaking away from tradition look like? What does it look like when we've been told and sort of placed in this box to care about tradition and feel guilted by our traditions? But what does it look like to break away from that and create our own tradition? What does our new tradition look like?
I saw that you just had a baby and you're trying to birth a film too. So like, I think you're a madman. First of all, congrats on the baby. Secondly, what is the status of like this crowdfunding campaign that you're putting together?
I'm hoping to launch it in about 3 weeks. And yes, thank you. Congrats to my fiance, because as she likes to say, I had a child. No, it's amazing. She's a little blessing, angel. She's awesome. Brought so much joy and patience into my life already 3 weeks later. But yeah, people think I am crazy because I've been taking some meetings during this time, and I don't know, man. I feel like I'm so passionate to move forward with these projects because we can't keep waiting. I've been waiting and hearing the same old story in the narrative since I was in college. How much longer am I going to want to keep waiting? And I'm not going to keep waiting for somebody to give me that yes. The coolest thing about the South of Sunset stuff was that the community rallied around that. When I share my sizzle scene with you or with other people really respond in such a positive way where I'm going, you know what? Why don't I crowdfund? Why don't I post this like I did that South of Sunset campaign to get people excited about what can come from this film? And in my heart, I mean, let's be real. Part of it is yes, I want to launch my career. I want to make a first time movie. But at the heart of it, I want to bring people with me. I want to give like that kid that we put in the sizzle scene. He had never acted before. This gave him so much confidence to want to pursue it, and for me to actually want to cast him. I mean, we're talking about giving people new opportunities in a project like this that can possibly break them out, because it means more opportunities for everybody's career. My cinematographer, my editor, whoever's involved, right? And I'm just so passionate about that I don't want to sit around and wait. I feel like the time is now to tell these stories. And we people in our community love comparing us to other communities. Be like, we need to be like them. It's like, no, we don't. We need to be like us. How do we activate around each other? If older generations don't want to help us change this, we are the generation that is, because I feel like we're all showing up for each other. And that's just kind of how I see it. Let me go put this out in the world and let people respond to it and say, yo, I'm really about to go do this, but I want to do it with the support of my community, about the people that understand the same fight.
Yeah, everybody keep an eye out for the crowdfunding campaign. I'm sure we'll be sharing it like crazy, because the stuff you have shared with me about this film, I think it's really powerful. And I think you're right. I think this is going to open up a lot of doors for people. With every new story and every new director is the opportunity for someone who had never seen a part like that, or a role, or seen a place for themselves in a crew like that. Speaking of that, I do like to ask my guests, who are the people they're a fan of? So these could be friends, peers, heroes, people you creep on Instagram who don't know who you are, but you're obsessed with their work. So who are some of those people for you?
First person that comes to mind, just because I'm so close to him, is my homie Blake Pickens, Native American comedian, writer, director. Like he's gonna take off. Like that's someone that I would actually love for you to talk to. Who else comes to mind? Maria Karina. She had a show called Grown on Complex, I believe. She also just did her first feature that premiered at the Miami International Film Festival, I believe. She's also like just making it happen. And I think now she has another feature in the works. Like I said, I'm a fan of the people I met on the festival circuit with South of Sunset. I met Eddie that way. Big fan of Eddie's. Francisco, Dominic, two other guys that I met at La Leaf who were like, yo, we screened your short, but like they're such cool human beings that I'm rooting for them. Michael Gutierrez and George Thompson. I told you about Steph, who is a project in-ball fellow right now for Film Independent. She also worked on Hensified, both seasons for Marvin and Linda. I'm really excited about her voice. She's, to me, gonna do some amazing things as well. And yeah, gosh, there's gonna be some people I miss, and because I'm like freaking out, and I'm gonna hear it. But I truly am rooting for all these people, as well as all the other people I talk to and support as writers. I really feel like the change is coming, and I hope it's not just what everyone says nowadays, but I feel like when I see what you're doing, and I see what other people are doing with podcasting, the Spanish Aquí presents people like Ryzen and that whole crew, like I'm big fans of them. I think that we're starting to see different voices that genuinely support each other, and I just hope that there's room for us, because I know how hard it is. It feels like a logjam for all of us, because I think all of us think that our projects are worthy of getting that space. And they are. They definitely are, and they should. But it seems like we're just fighting so hard to get that one through.
Yeah. So where can people follow you on social media?
Social media, I'm probably the most active on Instagram. You can find me at cinematrip_. There's an account that I used to have with my name that is not me. Do not follow that one. It's weird. Who knows who that person is? But yeah, cinematrip_.
And so I like to ask my guests to help me title the episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. And in that blank, you can put as many words as you want. You can mix them all around. You can change the words, just whatever feels true to you, this conversation, the writing you do. I also use it as a recruitment tool. So if somebody sees your title, they'll be like, oh, that's like me. I should check this person out. I should listen to this episode.
Interesting. How's this one? An American filmmaker from Los Angeles with a second generation Latinx perspective.
Perfect. I love it. And with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm a big fan. I'm ready for Hype Beast. And so excited to see what's going to come next.